I'm Roy Lee Lindsay with the North Carolina Pork Council, and I want everyone to remember bacon makes everything better.
Welcome back into another edition of Time Out, the Tobacco Road Basketball Show. Each week here on the North Carolina Sports Network. I am Mike Waddell. He is David Glenn, and up to my left is Kerry Keating. Now, David Glenn has been covering the ACC for over 38 years, a licensed attorney, an entrepreneur, two-time North Carolina Sportscaster of the Year. Coach Kerry Keating, he's been an assistant coach, a head coach, and a Division I basketball player, relocating to North Carolina 4 years ago, and he is in basketball nirvana right here in the bold North State. Our show, as always, is brought to you by the North Carolina Pork Council, serving over 44,000 North Carolinians who work in our $10.4 billion pork industry. And gentlemen, quite a weekend in the Atlantic Coast Conference. Clemson down in Littlejohn. It was wild. I was on hand. They ended Duke's quest for an undefeated 20-0 ACC run. Carolina avoided just by the hair of their chinny chin a home loss to Pitt. NC State went down in ACC after midnight at Stanford. Guys, it is ACC basketball season. It is the stretch run, and this is going to be a lot of fun. What were your impressions of this past weekend in ACC hoops?
Well, I think the solidification of the top was really what we were looking for. We've been longing for some separation for who those teams are going to be. And obviously Clemson with the huge victory at home in Littlejohn against Duke, but Louisville with two big wins. And I think the thing that stood out to me after watching some of these games this weekend was the guard play. And David's been adamant about the senior and the super senior guard play of both Louisville and Clemson. I think those things bode well for both of those teams. This could be one of those years where, especially after watching Clemson's performance on the weekend, you may only get 3 or 4 teams into the tournament, but I really wouldn't be surprised if all 3 or 4, if not the top 3, actually made the second weekend, all for different reasons. And obviously, if you can put 3 teams in the Sweet 16, it kind of cures some of the ills of not getting a plethora of teams in, a la the SEC, in the double digits right now. So all hope may not be lost in the end to get the units that are so desirable in the second weekend. And I think this weekend was big in solidifying the top 3 at least, even though Duke had a setback against Clemson, and that Duke, Louisville, and Clemson are clearly the cream of the crop in the ACC this year.
Yeah, Mike, beyond the ACC, real quick, shout out to High Point and UNC Asheville, who are the 2 best teams in the Big South, and they put on a show at High Point University. It was a triple-digit game. It was a lot of fun. It went down to the wire. The Panthers won. Bulldogs had beaten High Point earlier this year in Asheville. They're the 2 best teams in that league, even as, UNC Wilmington in the Coastal Athletic Association, UNC Greensboro in the Southern Conference. Those are others in our neighborhood who are making waves. But in terms of the ACC this past week, obviously Clemson's win over Duke showed that the Blue Devils do have some vulnerabilities, not as many, but just like everybody else, they have some. Also offered a reminder that Coach Brad Brownell's Tigers, for the second year in a row, and coming off that Elite 8 last year, they're capable of beating just about anyone with their combination of size and skill and experience, and I think really high basketball IQs. Carolina's win over Pitt mattered as well, but the bottom line is they're both still bubble teams. They've split against each other, and they both desperately need more resume builders down the stretch if they're going to make the big dance. And finally, I thought Wake Forest's trip to the West Coast was a big deal. The Deacs went 2-0 on that long trip to beat Stanford and Cal. That means the Demon Deacons are 9-2 in their last 11 games, and I think, as we've discussed for most of the season, the Deacs are poised for that first NCAA tournament bid in their 5 years under Coach Steve Forbes.
I was down at Littlejohn Coliseum for the Blue Devils and Clemson, and I've been, like you, I've been to over 100 basketball arenas easily in college basketball over the last 36 years. That environment in the newly reconfigured, this is the first time I've been to Littlejohn since they went from a north-south to an east-west configuration. This place is a madhouse. I mean, it was something else very, very similar to the environment that Baylor now has with their brand new arena, where the end zones are very steep and the noise just collapses down on the court. Brad Brownell and the Clemson Tigers, they could be a problem for a lot of people. In DG, it's only a month away, the 2025 ACC tournament in the Queen City of Charlotte. I know you're psyched up about that one.
Yeah, man, it is my one big thing this week. And whereas we all know that Duke is going to be the heavy favorite in Charlotte roughly 1 month from now, I think the Blue Devils' loss at Clemson was a reminder that they are beatable. And recent ACC history is a reminder that anything can happen when the league's automatic bid to the NCAA tournament is on the line. Quick reminder to everyone about the chaos factor in recent years at that ACC tournament. As we look forward to all these games between now and then, the two lowest seeded teams ever to win the ACC tournament, and I'm talking about in 70 plus years of the history of that event, both happened in the last 3 years. Mm-hmm. It was Coach Mike Young and star guard Hunter Couture that led Virginia Tech as a number 7 seed to the championship back in 2022. It was, of course, Kevin Keats and the charismatic big man DJ Burns leading the Wolfpack as a number 10 seed to the title in 2024. So those are the two lowest seeds ever to win that great event, and they've happened extremely recently. Beyond that, I want to quickly mention a broader theme that has been a lot of fun for me personally as a guy who's been to every ACC tournament since the late 1980s. In the last 13 years of the ACC tournament, guys, and I don't know how much of this comes through on TV, but we have had 4 examples of schools winning their first ever official ACC championship. You know, regular season title, first place, official champion is your ACC tournament champion. We've also had, in the same last 13 years, 3 other examples of schools that had not won the ACC tournament in a really long time, finally breaking through to do that in front of their fans again. The first timers, real quickly, to remind everybody, just in the last 13 years, Florida State under Leonard Hamilton, 2012. Miami under Jim Larinaga, 2013. Notre Dame under Mike Bray, 2015. Virginia Tech under Mike Young, 2022. And then the first time in a long timers over these past 13 seasons, Georgia Tech, NC State, and UVA. The Yellow Jackets had not won the ACC title since 1993. When they cashed in under Josh Pastner back in 2021. The Pack obviously hadn't won since 1987 before they won under Kevin Keats just last year. And the Cavaliers had not won since 1976 before Coach Tony Bennett led them to the title in 2014 rather. They also won the Cavs in 2018. The reason I bring these angles up, twofold. As someone who has been there on press row and often visits the fans around the arena in between games and during breaks, et cetera. And of course, I get to interview coaches and players after these games. I can tell you from front row, firsthand experience, there is something truly special about those situations where the fan base and the coach and the players get to experience either something for the first time in school history or for the first time in a long time. And this year, again, if Duke doesn't win, and they might, the other top candidates to win this year would have a great chance to continue this modern ACC tournament theme that I'm talking about. Louisville has never won the ACC title. The Pitt Panthers have never won the ACC title. Obviously, Cal and SMU and Stanford as new schools have never won the ACC title. Wake Forest hasn't won the ACC title since 1996. And I think some of those teams I just mentioned, Louisville, Pitt, Wake, I mean, again, Duke's the favorite, but they have a shot. The best example of all is the school that we've talked a lot about already and are going to talk more about later. It's the Clemson Tigers. Like a Louisville or a Pitt or a Wake, I believe they do have a legitimate chance to win the ACC tournament this year. The Tigers are the only original member of the Atlantic Coast Conference that has never won the official ACC title in men's basketball. The league is more than 70 years old. And not only have the Tigers never won the ACC championship, they have played in the ACC championship game only 2 times in 70 plus years. I have covered some good Clemson teams, Cliff Ellis actually was the only Clemson coach ever to lead the Tigers to a regular season title. And I covered that Clemson squad back in 1989-90. But this is one of the only Clemson teams I have seen since those Cliff Ellis squads of the late 80s that I truly believe has a chance legitimately to win the ACC tournament. I'm sure they'd love somebody else to knock off Duke so they don't have to try to beat the Blue Devils again. But it's a possibility, and it's not something that people should roll their eyes at. Of course, Duke is the favorite. Of course, the high seeds usually win. But I think this is going to be one really compelling storyline or series of storylines when those 15 ACC schools descend upon Charlotte in the middle of March. Under this new format, I have to remind everybody, the bottom 3 teams in the standings get left out of the ACC tournament. That's a new thing in 70-plus years. And one more storyline that we'll be tackling when we get to Charlotte about a month from now.
Man, it's a Tiger love fest right here. And Kerry, I know that's your one big thing this week. It's the makeup of Brad Brownell's Tigers that makes them a real threat to take home their first ever ACC tournament title in Charlotte.
Yeah, I'll pick up where David leaves that right now with Clemson. I really impressed having a chance to watch them for a full game and looking forward to watching them again tonight. I know David's been banging the Chase Hunter drum, and rightfully so, one of a handful of players who have played a multitude of games in their 6 years, and only 2 in 6 years, some in 5. And we'll talk about where those stats lie in terms of the national ranks of how many guys are now playing in their 150-plus games. But the thing about Clemson that I like, and I think that's kind of counterintuitive to where basketball has been going, and everything is cyclical, guys, is their structure inside. Obviously, with the return of Ian Shefflin, that was a big part of their Elite Eight run last year. They pick up the transfer in Victor Locken, and those 2 guys are their second and third leading scorers. And when you couple a head of the snake for 6 years in Chase Hunter with 3 guys below you, 2 transfers and another one that's been in your program and obviously played with Chase for some time, you know, Zachary being the 4th and then scoring 10 points or more. I was really impressed with how they were able to attack and kind of limit the ability of Duke to go through their 1 to 5 switches. Duke can do that because a lot of teams are the same and don't have 2 big guys, let alone 1. And sometimes you can get away with 1 through 5 switching, especially with the length and the size that Duke possesses. But that wasn't the case once Knipple got into foul trouble. Obviously, Flagg was trying to find himself on the offensive end. They tried some zone later on to maybe kind of get that type of effect, if you will, by taking up space in the floor. But I thought Clemson was really effective in utilizing their bigs. And this is something to keep an eye on. And I think something that can be an effective way to get into that second weekend, not just with an experienced and attacking point guard. And by the way, the chase down block from behind on Chase Hunter absolutely jumped myself and my son. We were watching the game out of nowhere. And the block from behind. And I was like, oh, my, he's got that in his bag too. I mean, this guy has got some, you can tell he's motivated. And obviously coming off the heels of last year and the run that they can make, I'm really excited about Clemson and the fact that David brought up, it could be a Clemson-Louisville semifinal if it stays the way it is. Those 2 battling to get a chance to go at Duke will be a heck of a game to watch in Charlotte. The only other thing I'll mention on top of all the things David said was, you know, Louisville and Pitt, especially Louisville, they're going to travel. They're going to be able to get some sort of fan interaction into Charlotte. This is going to be obviously the first time, but it's going to be an interesting conversation piece moving forward if the conference kind of stays the same, with the Stanford and Cal contingent being 3 time zones away. And I can just tell you that there aren't going to be a lot of people clamoring to go hang out in Charlotte for a weekend, as much as their loyalty to Cal and Stanford may be. So maybe a little bit of a disadvantage. And hey, every little thing counts in the tournament. You know, when those games get going and the underdog starts coming and everyone's obviously gunning for Duke, that crowd and then the other crowd around you can kind of rally behind you a little bit in tournament play. Maybe something to watch out for as we head into Charlotte in the next month.
I am a better person and a more effective business owner for having known and learned from Emily Parks over many years now. Emily's company, Organize for Success, helps multi-passionate business owners and executives bring harmony to all the layers of their lives, from work to side projects, from friends and family to hobbies, community, and beyond. With Emily's help, you too can make every minute matter. She helps you determine what earns your time and how to efficiently accomplish what matters. One of the many things I love about Emily is that she does not impose her will on her clients. She listens to them, That way she can better help them cultivate the lives they want to live. You can set up a complimentary call with Emily today by visiting organizeforsuccess.com.
This segment brought to you by our great friends at Atlantic Tire and Service, where DG and his family take all of their vehicles for routine maintenance, service needs, and a world-class selection of new tires. Atlantic Tire and Service, your one-stop tire and auto repair provider with highly trained technicians and a sales and support staff that are second to none. They've grown to 6 Triangle area locations, 2 in Raleigh, 2 in Kerry, 1 in Durham, and 1 in Wake Forest. You can learn more online at AtlanticTireOnline.com.
Let's move ahead now, and you see that big grin on David Glenn's face. That's because his beloved Philadelphia Eagles are the champions of the world. They come out of nowhere. They were the massive underdog, and they reach up and they knock down, just like Rocky Balboa, the mean, evil guys in red, the Kansas City Chiefs. And as I was watching the Duke-Clemson game down in Littlejohn Coliseum over the weekend, I was reminded that Drago, Dolph Lundgren, the actor, is actually a graduate of Clemson. So it was apropos when they finally get the lead there in the last 10 minutes, and you get the feeling it was like a flashback to that scene out of Rocky IV.
Got him hurt bad. Yeah. Now he's worried. You're cutting. You're hurting. You see? He's not a machine. He's a man. Nieprawda.
Right there. That's a perfect analogy for Clemson and Duke. That was a heck of a game, but Duke is fallible. We've been talking about, and rightly so, how magnificent Duke is. I did a post on X during the game. I took a shot of the Blue Devil huddle and said between the student athletes who will go on to play in pro basketball and the ones that will go on to work in industry and the coaches over there, there's probably $1 billion of career earnings on that bench. But sometimes that's not enough. And right now, I think that Duke, that might be the best thing ever to happen to them, Coach Keating, because if you get a loss, it kind of gives an opportunity for the coaches to go in there and reset. David, you've seen it a lot of times here in the ACC, and Coach, I know you've been a part of that, drawing up those X's and O's.
Yeah, it's a conundrum because you never really want to lose, right? You want to win every game, especially when you're that type of caliber team that can run the table almost through the ACC tournament into March. I mean, they've put themselves on that pedestal along with Auburn nationally right now. But from a coaching standpoint, yes, sometimes you want to take that loss at the right time. And Clemson's not a bad loss in any sense of the word. It's not going to cost them a seed line. You know, it's not like they lost to Miami or Notre Dame or even Virginia Tech or anyone in the bottom of the ACC, albeit even at home or on the road. So I'm sure there'll be some sort of film study and motivation. I think this is also helpful, too, because you're coming into a type of team, as we mentioned, that's a structure a little bit differently than the modern team, right? Playing against two bigs. There'll be some defensive study as to what they can do from a defensive standpoint to play against a team like that. And there'll certainly be some offensive study as to what didn't happen and what wasn't successful and where their offense was going. I think it was one of the first times they shot under 50% from the field all year long, right? They were great from two. I think they finished I think it was 47 per day. Duke had the best. Let me flip it around. Duke had the best 2-point defense, and Clemson took advantage of that. But on the other side, they weren't as effective offensively until kind of flag got going late. It almost became the game that Tyrese Proctor bailed them out, right? And we know that they have that in them. So there's always some sort of shining light within the muck, right? And I think that's one thing. Tyrese does have that ability to put up a 20, 25-point game. It just didn't happen to come out on the winning side. Very delicate balance, Michael. You never really want to accept that you can get something positive out of a loss when you're trying to win every game. But I'm certain that Duke staff will come out of this game and probably bode well if they happen to face Clemson in the ACC final come ACC tournament time.
I was struck by the fact that apparently when the ESPN broadcasters asked before the game, Clemson coach Brad Brownell, who's been around for a long time and is now one of the elder statesmen in this league, when they asked him, what was the first thing you think of, Coach? If you're going to beat Duke tonight, what do you think needs to happen? And Brad Brownell's first answer was, we better hit 10 threes or more. And I bring that up because Clemson only hit 4 threes for the game. which means you have to be really efficient just head to head, mano a mano, pugilism style to run off of Mike's Ivan Drago reference. And the Tigers did that. One thing I think you need to beat Duke, and obviously we're nitpicking the Blue Devils here, just to be clear, we all know, understand, accept, realize that the Blue Devils remain the team to beat. And as Coach said, they're not falling a seed line just because you lose to a really good team at Clemson. But you have to have some length and defenders to deal with Cooper Flagg. If you want to beat Duke, you better find a way to make him at least inefficient. He's still got 18 points, but he shot 6 for 17 from the field. That is inefficient, improved a little bit because he did hit those 3-pointers down the stretch. But Clemson reminded me of a classic old Carolina team. It's like, oh, there's Victor Locken, a true 7-footer who was a multi-year starter at Cincinnati. There's Ian Shefflin, kind of the modern day power forward, Euro 4, if you want to call him that. There's Chauncey Wiggins off the bench. That guy's like 6'9" or so with really long arms. The former Duke player, Christian Reeves, only played a handful of minutes, but he's a legit 7-footer plus, right? So there's what? That's at least 4 guys that have old school Carolina style length to deal with a Duke team that's one of the tallest and has one of the biggest wingspans of any team in the history of the Atlantic Coast Conference. And so the Tigers matched that. I thought it was really wise of Brad Brownell to tweak his starting lineup. He put Chase Hunter's brother, Dylan, in the starting lineup. I know Dylan played a ton. I think he was out there to start. But that means you essentially trying to beat Duke, which is a very good defensive team. They just smother you with that length and that wingspan. That's 3 point guards, essentially, or call some of them combo guards if you want. Chase Hunter's a combo guard. Jaden Zachary was the starting point guard at Boston College for the last 3 years before transferring to Clemson this year. And then Dylan Hunter, younger brother, he's a point guard. So, I think Clemson had maybe a dozen turnovers, which is not a horrible number against one of the best defensive teams in the nation. Duke lost despite guys hitting 12 out of 24 3-pointers. I mean, there's no way. Brad Brownell's an incredibly smart guy. There's no way he would have predicted, Duke will hit 12 out of 24. We, the Tigers, will hit 4 out of 10, but we're going to win by 6. Like, you got to really beat a team. And Clemson dominated the boards against Duke. I think Duke is, as Coach said, forced to look in the mirror. Kamen Malawach is not a comfortable offensive player. He's a butterfingers, not strong with the ball guy down low, and you got to factor that into the equation. He plays half the game, if not more. Knipple got into foul trouble. That's going to matter. He's probably their second best player besides Cooper Flagg, of course. Despite Tyrese Proctor having a phenomenal game, despite Sion James, starting point guard, 0 turnovers, there's a lot of good that Duke did in that game, including 50% from 3-point land. And yet they lost. So John Shire certainly not going to panic. He knows his team better than we possibly could from the outside. It's a brilliant Duke team. It's the number 1 seed, probably, Duke team. You could argue that they deserve number 1 in the polls, even despite this loss to Clemson, as much as anybody in the entire country, given their entire body of work. But you can be great and still be beatable. And that's what we were reminded of when Clemson took out a Duke team that played well in many ways at Little John Coliseum.
The fact that Clemson won that game the way they did, 77-71, and they did that by leaving a lot of points on the table. And here's what I'm talking about. They missed a lot of free throws. They missed a few front ends of 1-on-1. So that could be, let's say that was 10, 11 points. You get half of that. That means this was a first-rate ass kicking. And I think that's something, when you look at Duke, it's still amazing to me the plethora of talent that John Shire has at his disposal when a guy like Caleb Foster is rotting over there like he's waiting on somebody to score 100 points so they can give out Bojangles biscuits. I mean, that's a good basketball player. The other thing that was just striking to me was how thin, truly thin and young Cooper Flagg looks in person. I had seen him before, in person walking around a hotel or at Cameron Indoor and just walking around basketball practice. I had not really watched him up close and impersonal. This kid's thin, and he didn't zone out of the game, but it was very familiar when I was watching Mahomes come back with some late touchdown passes. Cooper Flagg got good late in that game, and obviously, gamers are gonna game. But he kind of was neutralized in a lot of ways. And what exactly was Clemson doing to take him out of his rhythm, Coach?
Well, you brought up an interesting point, and they said it almost 5 or 6 times, although it was more for the euphoria of Coach Vitale being back on the mic, back in the arena, that Cooper Flagg could technically, by age standards, still be in high school. He's still a very young person, right? And there's only so many people built and structured like LeBron James was in high school, where they come out with that 230, 240 frame. And I remember seeing that firsthand when LeBron James was in high school and recruiting. Cooper Flagg's got the frame that when he does get to the next level, is probably going to need to add 20 to 30, maybe even 35 pounds. But for right now, that's not sustainable. Now, he did end up cramping late in the game as well. I venture to guess on the road, at least. I didn't go back and look at their schedule, David, but I don't know how many environments like that he's been in just quite yet. Not that it's hot in a lot of different places. You can dehydrate in a lot of different ways, right? Your body can react differently. You never really know, especially in the wintertime when you're traveling. But I think the physicality and the maturity of the Clemson players that David mentioned, right? Bringing guys that have been there and done that before, being physical with them. I think that's clearly one way to negate length, is to kind of shrink it by being physical with it. And it wasn't just Flagg, but I think all of that length gets negated when you're physical with it. And they did get a pretty good whistle, but the other part of that too, from a statistical standpoint, Clemson almost got half of the missed shots that they missed. They got 11 offensive rebounds. Duke only had 15 defensive rebounds. Now, a large part of that is because Clemson didn't miss a lot of shots from two. They only took 10 threes, as David mentioned, 4 for 10, those 6 misses, but they also went 63% from two. But when you're rebounding almost half of the misses, you're going to be in a lot of games, whether you're making free throws or not, because you're getting more possessions and the other team's not scoring. I just don't think they ever really gave Duke a chance to kind of blow the game open for themselves. They controlled their pace and their tempo. They controlled what they wanted to do on the offensive end, and they were able to kind of neutralize any potential threat by getting to the offensive boards. And they kind of willed it at the end there. I mean, they overcame some missed free throws. I could have locked it up late. You mentioned the missed free throws. I think 3 or 4 of them came late in the game, where it could have been a 2 or 3 possession game. It might have been a heck of a lot easier. Nevertheless, I think this is going to be a game that could be looked upon. These are one of the games when you get into the postseason and you're playing Duke in the tournament, you're looking for commonalities. You're looking for reasons why, and not just because they lost the game, but there's a lot to take apart and study from this for teams that may not or may be like-minded or like-structured in Clemson as to how they got this done. I think the one thing you can kind of point back, regardless of the roster makeup of your team compared to Clemson, is beating them on the boards and really taking advantage of the offensive rebounds. Young teams inherently don't really kind of get and understand how important defensive rebounding is, like to really go attack the board. Now, and again, nitpicking is a great way to say it, because Duke still is what Duke is from a talent standpoint. But if there's one thing that stood out to me, I thought it was the fact they're able to neutralize some of the open court things. How many times have we seen that from Cooper Flagg this year, where he takes a rebound and it's off to the races as the point forward, and it either leads to a great kick out or a draw and kick or some highlight dunk? Didn't really have a chance to do that at all, because you neutralize transition in one of 2 ways. You either send 3 or 4 guys back and then load up the paint and just concede the rebound, or you kind of say, okay, we're going to send 2 or 3 to the glass, and we're just going to outwork you on the glass and limit your transition by getting the rebound. I think that was one way that they were able inadvertently as a team to kind of neutralize the effect that Cooper Flagg could have had on the game.
It's going to be interesting to watch too, Mike, how Duke responds the next time there's game pressure. As Coach said, there's no reason to even think about the panic button, much less look at the panic button or push the panic button if you're Duke head coach John Shire. But lingering in the background, and I actually thought John Shire and Duke's decision to add a non-conference game against a quality Illinois team. They actually played Illinois on February 22nd. It's one of the only games for any ACC team the rest of the way that is an out-of-conference game. And obviously, Illinois is a good, well-coached, physically tough team. So that'll be another challenge, just like this trip to Clemson was a challenge. But during the Blue Devils, I think it was a 16-game winning streak before they lost at Clemson, which was the longest winning streak in the nation. Most of those were blowouts. I mean, the game prior to Clemson, they beat Syracuse by like 100. I know it wasn't that, but it felt like 100 on that trip to face the Orange on the road. They beat Carolina, obviously, at Cameron by 17. They did face some game pressure against Wake Forest, even a little bit when NC State visited Duke. There was a little game pressure. But most of these wins by the Blue Devils have been blowouts. So, way back at the beginning, the loss to Kentucky, the loss to Kansas, the win over Arizona, the win over Auburn. I mean, Duke's got some incredible crown jewels on their resume. And then, yes, they faced a ton of game pressure against those elite opponents in non-conference play. But, man, these last 16-1 would be their record now. There might only be 3 or 4 games out of those 17 where they faced game pressure. And obviously, there's inevitably, no matter how good you are, there's going to inevitably be game pressure come the NCAA tournament. And with so many freshmen out there, that's just one more thing John Shire needs to think about and make sure they react the right way. I actually think more Duke players than not reacted well at Clemson, right? I mean, Proctor was great. James was reliable. Malik Brown was good off the bench. Flagg was Flagg. Malawach, not so much. The bench overall, not so much. And Knipple has to just be careful about the foul trouble. Maybe he learned a lesson there. But game pressure is, of course, you want to win by as much as possible. But it's part of the learning curve, especially for young teams, to fight your way through game pressure, home, road, or neutral. And the Blue Devils, again, more good than bad at Clemson. We'll see what they do against Illinois. But I don't think they really faced a hot box environment the rest of the way. Like a trip to UVA, a trip to Miami, of course, nothing hot boxish about that for the Blue Devils. And that trip to the Smith Center has all sorts of festivities awaiting at the end of the regular season. But as famous as the Smith Center is, it's not really accurate to call it a hot box the way I think of Little John or, Cole Fieldhouse back in the day at Maryland or a variety of other places that Duke has been this year. Whether you are moving locally, nationally, or even internationally, and whether you're a residential or commercial customer, please consider our friends at XL Moving and Storage, an award-winning Allied Van Lines agent with offices in Greensboro and Raleigh. Thanks to their 25 years of experience helping North Carolinians all across the state with their moving and storage needs, XL has become the trusted hometown North Carolina moving services company. Our good friends Jim Dorsett and Jody Hatley, along with their hardworking staff, offer customized, tailored relocation and storage solutions to the people of North Carolina and beyond. Visit them online today at xlms.com. That's EXCELMS.com. If you are anywhere near Wilmington, North Carolina, and looking for a little live music, a cold beer, a tangy slushie, a fun crowd, or just a taste of the good life at the beach, Jimmy's Bar in Wrightsville Beach is the place for you. Located on North Lumina Avenue, just 1 block from the sand and waves of the Atlantic Ocean, Jimmy's features a full bar with nightly beer and drink specials, and it hosts musical performers almost every day of the year. One more fun fact, Jimmy's annual Children's Bike Drive, which started in 2017, now distributes more than 1,000 bicycles and helmets per year to young people in the Wilmington area and beyond. Jimmy's Bar, your home away from home on Lumina Avenue in Wrightsville Beach.
We teased it in the opening segment. We're going to come back to it right now. This is the time of the year when you start to see teams getting hot. And if they get hot at the right time, they can make a run, not only in Charlotte, but on to the NCAA tournament. Gentlemen, David, we'll start out with you.
I'm actually more a believer in the Demon Deacons. They have had that mid-season adjustment, and there have been some very famous mid-season adjustments in ACC history, memorable because they turned out well. We'll see how it goes at Wake Forest, but that's a team that's 18-6 that has been on a roll lately. I think it's 9 of their last 11 the Deacons have won, and much of that success has come since they elevated the Louisville transfer point guard Tyler Johnson into the starting lineup. We talked about the importance of point guard on our most recent show. We even talked about Steve Forbes' kind of unusual answer way back at Media Day when I asked him about point guard, and he gave me a little bit of a guards kind of answer. Well, without a true point guard in the lineup, the cylinders were not hitting properly in the Wake Forest offense. And a team that has improved on the boards, has improved defensively, and I think gives Steve Forbes the best chance of his 5 years in Winston-Salem to make the NCAA tournament, was being weighed down by a very, very inefficient offense. Tyler Johnson is not ready to be a star in the Atlantic Coast Conference, but he might be ready to just be a reliable point guard. And that's all Wake needs. You got Hunter Salas to one side, you got Cameron Hildreth to the other side, you got Efton Reed down low, and you got the App State transfer Trayvon Spillers at power forward. All Wake needs is stability beyond those 4 proven players. And I think Tyler Johnson at midseason with his elevation into the lineup has given the Deacs more confidence, more continuity, more fluidity with its offense. And it's just allowed Hunter Salas and Cameron Hildreth to do more of what they do well. So I think Wake is as good a candidate as anybody outside the top 3 of Duke and Louisville and Clemson to get on a roll here late. And I know they're on a bad roll, the Pitt Panthers, but it would not surprise me if Jeff Capel got that group to turn it around. So Wake and Pitt would be my candidates for making a nice little run here, either down the stretch or at the ACC tournament or both.
Let me put on my optimistic Carolina blue hat right here and take a look ahead for what could happen at Carolina, and obviously much maligned in what's been happening so far in their season. And when you look at Carolina, really the only thing holding them up, the 14-10 record, obviously not so pretty, is the fact that they have the number 3 ranked out of conference strength of schedule in the country. And we know they didn't win a lot of those games, and obviously they're not doing well in what's perceived to be the most important thing in Quad 1, but they do have 10 Quad 1 games. And we're going to find out pretty quickly come March Madness and Selection Sunday, is this one of those years where you needed to play those games or you needed to win those games? And by all accounts, for what's shaping up in terms of what bracketologists are showing us and just kind of who's got a chance, is there are 3 or 4 ACC teams kind of battling themselves, certainly within the conference, for some positioning and what they could do in Charlotte, but also maybe for the NCAA tournament as well. And when you look at Carolina's schedule, they will be at Virginia Tech, home against Miami, at Florida State, home against UVA, home against NC State, at Syracuse. Not a really daunting schedule, but not one that also provides a lot of opportunity to move the needle. Those are games that they should win by virtue of the numbers and by virtue of how things have happened and played out so far. When you take those 6, it leaves tonight's game obviously against Clemson, and then obviously the aforementioned season finale at Duke. So obviously some resume builders, if you will. But even if it's a 6-2, now you're looking at a 20-win Carolina team. And this is where the ACC tournament and how it shapes up could be the most important bracket in recent memory, because you're going to need some of those matchups if you're SMU, if you're Pittsburgh, certainly if you're Carolina, maybe if you're Stanford, because as we talked about earlier and have seen, Stanford has the pieces in place, and one of the 5, if not 2 best players in the conference, and Maxime Reynaud, they could make a run. That's the type of team, and David mentioned the teams that weren't supposed to win the tournament that did win the tournament. I've always opined that Stanford could be that type of team. Good guards and a really good dynamic big man, and bring in something a little bit different to the mix. So Carolina has it teed up for themselves starting tonight. And obviously Clemson's coming off the high of beating Duke. It's a quick turnaround, albeit at home. Carolina coming in, sneaking one out at home. Quick trip right down the road into Clemson. This is a bigger game than I think people realize on the Tar Heels side, that you may say, oh, well, Clemson's better and they're ahead of us in the standings. We may not actually be favored in the game. I haven't even looked at the spread or what the pundits say. But if you're Carolina, this is a game that can kind of springboard you into those 6 games that are very winnable. And then if you somehow get this together and all of a sudden things are starting to positively spin, You go into that last home game against Duke on top of the euphoria and the rivalry and senior day. And RJ Davis's last game saying, this not only elevates us, but this may actually solidify us as being a team you don't want to see going to the ACC tournament. So the optimist in me, being the Carolina guy that I want to be, is that they have a chance given their schedule. This could all change by tomorrow morning, depending on what happens in Littlejohn tonight. But really looking forward to watching that game tonight and seeing what Carolina fares.
Guys, I made a trip on Super Bowl Sunday to Whole Foods, where all the Carolina graduates tend to buy their groceries. And I was looking in the dairy section, and on the side of a milk carton, I saw the picture of Ian Jackson. Where the heck has Ian Jackson went over the last 2 weeks? 3 weeks ago, he was looking to be, potentially a first-round draft pick in the 2025 NBA draft. Now, he's just vanished. And that's one of the mysteries about this Carolina team. You see so much potential and so much talent, perhaps unrealized talent, inconsistent talent. But where has Jackson gone?
It's hard to know. This is a continuation of a theme under Hubert Davis in his 4-year tenure in Chapel Hill. Because remember, 2 years ago, when the Tar Heels infamously missed the NCAA tournament entirely after being the preseason #1 team in the rankings, something that had never happened in the modern history to any school of college basketball, the main reason they missed it 2 years ago was that they never figured out their backcourt chemistry. Individually, Caleb Love and RJ Davis were outstanding players. Together, they did not make a good match. They did not make each other better. They did not help the Tar Heels' offensive efficiency. And we were left scratching our heads because it never came together. And then the Heels are, turning down a bid to the NIT after you see a team that certainly had enough talent 2 years ago to make the NCAA tournament, and they didn't. Well, here we are 2 years later, and it's the same fundamental question. Different people, but the same fundamental question. Hubert Davis is not only a former Carolina player, he's a former Carolina guard under Dean Smith. You'd think he would have an even better window into this world. His job includes making the pieces fit together offensively and defensively. And as we've said all year long, Hubert Davis's maybe biggest problem is roster construction. They missed all those big guys in the transfer portal. Carolina is without a true quality big man literally for the first time in 6 decades. They're not going to have a single big man average 10 points per game. I've done the research. That has not happened since the 1960s or even earlier. So it's different in terms of construction, but it's too late to solve that problem mid-season. It's never too late to solve chemistry issues, and that's his challenge. When you add together second-year starter Elliot Cadeau at point guard, fifth-year senior and last year's National Player of the Year RJ Davis, together with Ian Jackson and Seth Trimble, a 6'3" guy who might lead the Tar Heels in rebounding for the season. That's never, again, the Heels have never been led by a 6'3" guy in rebounding for a season. These are weird times at Chapel Hill. But those 4 guys are good enough that if their chemistry is right, they're not just an NCAA tournament team, they're a dangerous NCAA tournament team. The chemistry is not right. I don't have a great answer for the why part of your question, Mike. That to me is a partially an X and O issue. And the Tar Heels have a bunch of guards who love to pound that dribble into the floor. And if you watched Clemson beat Duke, they were playing with 3 guards much of that game. They moved the ball a lot. And there was a purpose beyond the dribble. And there was a purpose beyond the passes. And it was part of a pretty fluid Clemson offense. The Tar Heels don't play fluid offense with this particular group of skill sets. And it's, as we've mentioned on previous shows, even the body language toward each other. You hesitate to read too much into that. But the Tar Heels look like they're always having fun. I mean, you're playing college basketball at the University of North Carolina. And, sometimes they look like they're having fun, but overall, probably not as much as some other Carolina teams. They look more to me like the weird chemistry Carolina team again of 2 years ago, where despite the presence of Baycott and Love and Davis and others, they couldn't make the NCAA tournament. If they don't figure out the backcourt chemistry issue, they're going to miss the NCAA tournament again. And if they do somehow find a way for Ian Jackson to be good on the same night that RJ Davis is good, and RJ's played better lately, and Elliot Cadeau is good, and Seth Trimble is good. The same question you just asked about Ian Jackson, we could have asked about RJ Davis at the beginning of the season, and we could have asked about Seth Trimble after his midseason looks like an all-ACC player explosion, and he just crashed back to earth and looked like a completely different player coming back from his injury. And Elliot Cadeau has had his moments. So the same question we're talking about with Ian Jackson right now could be asked about any of those 4 Carolina guards. It's almost like passing around a bug of some sort, an illness in the locker room. They have passed around this black cloud that seems to be hovering over one or more of their heads at any time in that Carolina backcourt. And they don't have enough of a deep roster to overcome those sorts of issues, and they're running out of time to figure them out.
Kerry, you've been in the locker room. You've had to put together those type of chemistry equations to make sure that everybody's on the same page. Were you surprised that coming off of a week without a midweek game, that the Tar Heels weren't more coherent, especially Ian Jackson?
You think that time at this part of the season would really help heal some wounds. And when you're looking at Jackson, they're 2-4 in their last 6 games, and they're actually 2 possessions away from being 0-6. But when you parallel that with Jackson, Mike and Dave, 6, 7, 8, 9 points in no particular order of the losses. In the wins, 19 versus BC, 0 against Pitt. So they're 2-4, and he's got 59 points. Take out the 19, he's got 40 in the last 5. This is a guy in the beginning of the season we were putting as one of the 5 best players in the ACC in our early ACC voting, right? So let me take the pessimist side of this now. Have the optimistic side as a Tar Heel wannabe. Let's go to the pessimistic side. Things aren't looking great when you're 2-4 in your last 6 and could really be 0-6 if not for 2 possessions and 2 balls go through the basket at the end of the clock. This is something that also you can look to that. David mentioned Duke playing Illinois, and I went through it because I wasn't aware of that. Illinois has 3 players on their roster that are projected to go in the NBA draft. At this point, they all likelihood would. And I bring that up because Ian Jackson is still projected to go in the NBA draft, as you mentioned, Michael. There's 2 things that happen in February, and I always high school kids, when they play in a high school season, although they do play year-round in AAU, their actual season is kind of coming to an end in the middle of February. Physically, mentally, they're kind of in that mode where they're ready to move on to the AAU season. It's actually become a phenomenon when you have a successful high school, and then all of a sudden February hits, and all the AAU guys are calling you. Who are you going to play with? Where are you going to go? We're going to travel. And right away, as soon as it's over, right into AAU season. So there's a mentality that's built into these kids and talented kids like Jackson for years that inevitably happens around this time of year. The difference is now it's the agents and the Instagram DMs and I'm not saying that's the reason, but it definitely is out there, and it's out there more now than it ever has been before. I remember when NBADraft.net first came out, all the coaches wanted to shoot that thing to the sun because, it was the first, viral ability for the outside world to infiltrate that you couldn't control. You couldn't stop kids from seeing that, and kids inevitably see. And now with all the things that come with that, in all likelihood, Ian Jackson's probably going to go to the NBA next year. You can't turn down first-round money right now. You got to start your clock to get to your second contract. When you're that talented, as we talked before, the NBA guys think they can fix any ills that you may have. As it relates to Hubert and the staff right now, I think the task at hand is, as we talked about, maybe where this schedule lines up for them to get to the postseason, is to sit Ian Jackson down and say that there will be some value at the NBA level from the right front office for you helping us overcome these obstacles, help us get to the postseason, and then actually perform on a postseason level that may elevate your status. You just kind of have to accept it. And I'm just totally making this up, completely hypothetical, but potentially realistic in that if that's the problem, if his eyes are starting to wander out of Chapel Hill, that you may want to bring him back in to help him focus more on what's going to happen in Chapel Hill. The one thing you can do as a coach, in my mind, in this day and age with those type of kids, is just accept the reality that you're a pit stop for them and try to get the most out of them for your team that you possibly can. They had success with that early on, and just by virtue of the numbers, maybe there's some parallels that they're not playing as well as they should by virtue that Ian Jackson's not. So figure out a way to integrate that with what's happening now with RJ, with Cadeau, with whatever bigs are going to step up. And I know Lubin had 17 points in the game. Maybe he's a revelation that we can get some points out of him. But they're going to need Ian Jackson to be successful in his own right to make this run. And that time you would think, Michael, would help them. And I think tonight looms large and could bode well for the Tar Heels if not only they come out with a road win, but they somehow get Jackson back on track to be a big part of that. Because when he is a big part of that, it can really unleash the rest of the roster.
Mike, real quick postscript on that. Hubert Davis has told the story numerous times this year that Ian Jackson, even as this highly touted prep All-American from New York City, texts him almost every day with the question, how can I get better? And what coach wouldn't want that in any player, star player, walk-on, or in between, right? I think Hubert's answer in recent weeks, one of them, I'm sure there's 1,000 things, Coach Keating, hey, it could be how to hedge a high ball screen, right? I mean, who knows how many things you could say, or the positioning of your elbow on your three-point shot. I mean, there's so many things, but one of them could be just a human reaction. How can you make yourself better as a player? Be where your feet are. Don't think about the NBA. Figure out a way to endear yourself as the young man with fifth-year senior RJ Davis. Humble yourself if that's what it takes in that locker room. Hubert Davis himself is a profoundly, to his core, humble human being. He really is. Again, I've known him since the late 80s. He's hung around in the NBA as a player for a long time, successful broadcaster, successful assistant coach. He's led an amazing life despite these ups and downs as a head coach in a relatively brief time. He's a fundamentally humble man. And just like Hubert Davis, one of the most accurate three-point shooters in history, can help any of these dudes, including Ian Jackson, with their three-point shots, I think he can help with that psychological element, maybe including with his response to the text of the day. How can I become better today, Coach? Well, here's one way beyond, that the court itself, the X's and O's themselves. And that's, I'm not placing blame. I don't know who's causing the chemistry problems, and we've all been human beings long enough to know that there's not always a bad guy when there's chemistry problems. Sometimes pieces just don't fit together, but it's Hubert Davis's job to make those backcourt pieces fit better. The Lawson Insurance Group in Raleigh is a family-owned business led by 3 actual brothers who happen to be huge sports fans: Ken Lawson, Miller Lawson, and Michael Lawson. I know these guys, I trust these guys, and I send these guys my own insurance business and that of my family. The next time you have insurance needs, I hope you'll do the same. The Lawson Insurance Group is known for its commitment to community and its dedication to ensuring that North Carolinians and their businesses are prepared for life's inevitable challenges, with the reminder that as a high street insurance partner, Lawson Insurance Group offers local expertise and support that, combined with High Street's extensive national resources, means more choice and support for you as their client. To learn more, search Lawson Insurance Group online. The Lawson Insurance website will be the first link that pops up. King Neptune Restaurant in Wrightsville Beach is the longest running restaurant in New Hanover County. That's since 1947. And it recently was renovated to an impeccable degree by our good friends Jimmy Galeese and his amazing wife, Keating. Their outstanding chefs offer fresh local seafood, salad options, and creative, tasty variations of pork, beef, and poultry dishes. King Neptune has always been a great choice for dinner and/or drinks, and now it's open for lunch and brunch too. Check out the lunch, brunch, and dinner menus at neptuneswb.com. That's Neptunes with an S, then WB for Wrightsville Beach. Again, the King Neptune Restaurant website is neptuneswb.com.
Organized for Success is one of our longtime partners here on the North Carolina Sports Network, and it's important as you look ahead to planning out your viewership as an ACC basketball fan that you plan ahead. You're looking ahead, perhaps, to what the big games are coming up in the next 7 days here in the Atlantic Coast Conference, and especially on Tobacco Road. David Glenn, what's your big look ahead for the coming week in basketball?
Mine's twofold. One, obviously, Carolina at Clemson tonight. This game at Little John Coliseum, plus that regular season finale against Duke at the Smith Center. Those are the Tar Heels' last two chances during the regular season to get off the NCAA tournament bubble. They probably won't win both, but they'd better win one, or they might head to Charlotte feeling like they need to win the ACC tournament and the league's automatic bid just to feel right on Selection Sunday. Part two is SMU. The Mustangs' record is a good record right now. But unlike Wake Forest, an ACC bubble team that, remember, beat Michigan, that is an absolute jewel on the Deacons' non-conference resume that they did not have last year and other years they've ended up in the NIT. Unlike even Carolina, which does, remember, have that UCLA victory. The Bruins are a nice, solid, 6 seed or whatever in the current projections. Even unlike Pitt, which won at Ohio State, an NCAA tournament team probably. Also beat West Virginia, which might be an NCAA tournament team. Unlike those other ACC bubble squads, SMU does not have one of those non-conference resume builders. And SMU, even in conference, doesn't have a great win. So the Mustangs host Pitt on Tuesday this week. They host Wake Forest on Saturday this week. Their first-year head coach, Andy Enfield, is a guy many of our viewers and listeners might remember, took Florida Gulf Coast to the NCAA tournament many years ago. More recently, he took Southern Cal to the NCAA tournament 5 different times during his time with the Trojans. The 18-5 is a nice record the Mustangs have right now. 9-3 in the ACC is a nice record. And it is the best of the 3 new ACC schools, I would argue. Cal's not very good, Stanford better. I think SMU is highest in the bubble order as we speak among those 3. Cal not even involved. But as we speak, with Pitt coming to town and Wake coming to town for SMU, their best wins, the Mustangs, right now are over Stanford, not right now a projected NCAA tournament team, Washington State, and LSU. Those 2 non-conference wins are against okay teams, but probably not NCAA tournament teams. So if SMU beats either both or one of Pitt and Wake this week, they're going to look more like they belong and more of a serious contender for an at-large bid to the NCAA tournament. If they lose to both of these bubble teams this week, Pitt and Wake, the Mustangs are going to be running out of chances to show that they belong in that 68-team bracket.
Yeah, Dave, when you look at SMU's numbers, just to solidify that conversation, 260 non-conference strength of schedule, they don't have any quad 1 wins. And I wanted to come over the top even to go past that. But when you look at SMU, they're going to need a favorable matchup in the ACC tournament because the quad 1 wins can only come from within right now. Only Duke playing non-conference game outside of the ACC at Illinois. It's going to be really fascinating to see from an ACC perspective. Even if SMU finishes ahead of Carolina in a record, you're looking at SMU and Carolina, and to a lesser extent Pittsburgh, which is why Carolina's win against Pittsburgh was so big. The Pittsburgh game, as you mentioned, Dave, versus SMU looms large. The Stanford game still looms large because they're the next team behind. And as I mentioned, I think a team that gets the right draw in the ACC tournament might find themselves winning a game or two. This is going to be one of those years where we're going to find out, how important and a lot of people like to write off the conference tournament. There's always the argument every year, like, well, we really don't need it. Well, we're only doing it because people want to go to the games and go hang out in an arena or Charlotte or Atlanta or New Orleans or wherever for the weekend and celebrate the season. But the teams really don't need more games. This is going to be one of those years where, the conference needs this. The conference needs this because 1 or 2 teams are going to be relying on those matchups that aren't on the schedule normally. And how it falls out, how it shakes out over the next 3 or 4 weeks, it's going to be fascinating to see what those matchups are and the amount of emphasis that will be placed on them. You talked about those SMU games in Pittsburgh, Wake Forest, and Stanford. You can't afford to lose to SMU. SMU has to win them. And in the case of Carolina, Pittsburgh, and Wake Forest, as we said about Wake Forest, maybe having the most favorable of the 6 remaining games in terms of rankings, it's really going to come down to just winning the games. I mean, you always say that in February when you're a coach. You try to play the numbers game, and you know that things can happen. If your health is intact, you can't change your schedule, but you can affect where you're at heading into that tournament. Having some momentum going in there is going to be critical this year, maybe more than ever. It's going to be really fascinating to see what the matchups turn out to be once that ACC bracket is announced. So I think this month's going to go by pretty quick. I think it's going to be a quick month. Obviously some key matchups here and there. But I know I'm looking forward to seeing what happens in Charlotte in the middle of March. I think we'll get there sooner than later. And for some teams, they wish they were there already because they don't want to have a chance to falter. But for some of these other teams, every game is going to be critical and crucial. And obviously, David mentioned the case of SMU, Wake Forest, and of course, Carolina. Be really interested to see if they eat their own, if they balance themselves out. You still look at the national pundits right now. You're talking about 3 ACC teams right there. Literally, last team in, first team out. Last team in Wake Forest, first team out Carolina, then SMU, and then maybe even Pittsburgh. It's amazing. I don't know if that's ever happened before. I don't know in recent memory if we've ever had a group of 8 to be the last 4, first 4, have half of those teams be from one conference and the ACC at that. So one of those years where Charlotte looms large, and we'll get there before you know it.
This has been Time Out, the Tobacco Road Basketball Show. We look forward to interacting with you on our social media. You can find that at the NC Sportsnet. Also read outstanding David Glenn exclusive content at our website, ncsportsnetwork.com. We are here throughout the week at our YouTube channel with shorts, coverage from press conferences, practices, you name it, we have it covered right here. This is, without question, the top basketball show in all of the ACC region, and the only one that has a 38-year journalist, a former head coach, and a former director of athletics. We don't talk about the experts. We have actually done the jobs, and we bring you that information every week right here on the North Carolina Sports Network. For David Glenn and Coach Kerry Keating, I'm Mike Waddell. We'll see you at the games.